gain the upper hand with powerful questioning techniques. Yes, means is nothing if there is no implementation. That statement is the core of the skill we will cover in this section. To implement a demand, the how is more important than you agreeing to it. In fact, asking how implies that you would do it if you had the answer. Therefore, by asking how in a negotiation, the other person will switch from a demanding role to a problem-solving role. How type questions are a surefire way to keep negotiations going. They put the pressure on your counterpart to come up with answers and to contemplate your problems when making their demands. With enough of the right how questions, you can read and shape the negotiation environment in such a way that you'll eventually get to the answer you want to hear. You just have to know where you want the conversation to go when you're devising your questions. If you don't mentally know what you want, you are not negotiating. You are being taken for a ride. Know what outcome you want. This is first and foremost. The second key to how type questions is that they are gentle and graceful ways to say no and guide your counterpart to develop a better solution, which will be your solution. A gentle how type question invites collaboration and leaves your counterpart with a feeling of having been treated with respect. The most common how type question you'll use is some version of "How am I supposed to do that?" Your tone of voice is critical, as this phrase can be delivered as either an accusation or a request for assistance. How type questions are always a request for assistance, so pay attention to your voice. These questions tend to have the positive effect of making the other side take a good look at your situation. This positive dynamic is especially effective if leading up to it, you've already been empathic with your counterpart. This engages the dynamic of reciprocity to lead them to do something for you. "I'd love to help, but how am I supposed to do that?" is an example of a how type question. Besides being able to say no, the other key benefit of asking how is that it forces your counterpart to consider and explain how a deal will be implemented. A deal is nothing without good implementation. By making your counterparts articulate implementation in their own words, your how type questions will convince them that the final solution is their idea. And that's crucial because people always make more effort to implement a solution when they think it's theirs. That is simply human nature. How type questions accomplish the following: redirect focus, create a sense of obligation, imply a practical barrier, highlight your perspective, encourage collaborative problem solving, and maintain a constructive tone. When they answer, you summarize their answers until you get a "that's right." Then you'll know they've bought in. On the flip side, be wary of two telling signs that your counterpart doesn't believe the idea is theirs. If you hear "you're right," it's often a good indicator they are not on board with what is being discussed. And the second red flag is when you push for implementation and they say, "I'll try," you should get a sinking feeling in your stomach because this really means I plan to fail. If you hear either of these, dive back in with how type questions until they define the terms of successful implementation in their own voice. Then, to be sure before moving on, summarize what they have said to get a "that's right." We will cover the true importance of "that's right" in a later section. Now that we have the concept, let's take a moment to show how they work. It is so simple, yet it forces the other person to do your mental work and still leave them feeling like they are in charge. Using how type questions redirects focus. When the other party is focused on making their demands or asserting their position, a "how am I supposed to" question interrupts that train of thought. Instead of them continuing to push their agenda, they now have to stop and consider how to respond to your question. Your ideal questions should contain the demand or benefit to the other person without identifying your problem. This is how Jaime used a "how am I supposed to" question to redirect the focus. Jaime is a marketing manager, and Samantha, her boss, is putting a lot of pressure on her to launch a new social media campaign within the next 2 weeks. Samantha has been critical of the performance of Jamie's team in previous campaigns and is now demanding that this new campaign needs to drive significantly more leads and web traffic. Samantha says, "The last campaign was a total flop. I need you and your team to step it up this time. I want to see a 50% increase in web traffic and at least 1,000 new leads generated within the first week of the launch. This is a critical initiative, so I'm counting on you to make it happen." Rather than just agreeing to her demands or getting defensive, Jamie interrupted with a "how am I supposed to" type question. Jamie says, "I understand the importance of this campaign. Our previous campaigns have typically taken 4 to 6 weeks to ramp up and see that level of impact. With this shortened timeline, how am I supposed to generate those kinds of results? By shifting the focus to the logistics and feasibility of their request, you're forcing your boss to pause and reconsider their expectations. Instead of them just continuing to assert what they want, they now have to think about how you can actually make it happen, or if their targets are unrealistic given the constraints. How am I supposed to? Question makes them have to provide more guidance and support, rather than just dumping the responsibility on you. It redirects the conversation towards finding a practical solution, rather than just an argument over unmet demands. This can help prevent the situation from escalating into a confrontation, instead turning it into a collaborative problem-solving discussion to meet the goals. By framing it as "how am I supposed to," you're placing an implicit responsibility on the other party to provide a solution or guidance. This makes them feel like they need to be helpful and constructive rather than just adversarial. John's company is negotiating a partnership agreement with Eli, the CEO of a tech startup. During the discussion, you notice Eli's body language shift as you bring up the topic of revenue sharing. He also begins to fidget in their chair, and his tone becomes slightly more defensive. Eli then responds, "I'm a bit worried about the revenue split. My team has worked so hard to build this technology, and I'm concerned that the proposed percentages don't fully reflect the value we're bringing to the table. I think it should be an 80-20 split in our favor. This was definitely unreasonable for the amount of work and time John would be investing." Instead of getting defensive or agitated, he responded. John says, "I understand your concern about properly valuing the work your team has put in to create satisfied customers. My concern is how am I supposed to offer great products to them without revenue?" Eli then elaborates on their financial projections and the importance of maintaining a certain margin to sustain the company's growth. By actively listening and encouraging them to share their perspective, you demonstrate empathy and a genuine desire to address their underlying concerns. With this foundation of mutual understanding, and by highlighting some of the points made by Eli, John was now prepared to explore creative options for revenue sharing that align with both parties' priorities. Rather than just reacting to their position, the question allows you to inject your own viewpoint and concerns into the discussion. This can help establish you as an equal participant, not just someone reacting to their terms. Let's revisit the business partnership between John and Eli again, this time highlighting how John can use the how type question to introduce their own concerns. Eli says, "Okay, so for the revenue sharing, we're proposing an 80-20 split in our favor. That aligns with the market rates for similar partnerships." John says, "I understand the 80-20 split is common in this industry. However, I'm concerned that structure may present some challenges for my organization in terms of our long-term financial sustainability. How do you think we could structure the revenue sharing in a way that works better for both of us?" By asking how the revenue sharing could be structured more favorably, John is implicitly acknowledging the need to find a mutually acceptable solution. He is not just rejecting Eli's proposal, but instead inviting Eli to collaborate on exploring alternatives. This framing shifts the dynamic from a one-sided negotiation to a joint problem-solving exercise. The negotiator is signaling that they're open to working together to figure out the best way forward, rather than simply insisting on their own terms. The how question encourages the CEO to engage more actively in the discussion, as they now have the opportunity to propose ideas and solutions. It creates a more collaborative atmosphere where both parties are invested in finding a resolution that addresses each other's key concerns and priorities. A more direct response, like that 80-20 split, doesn't work for us. While this may convey John's position, it doesn't invite the counterpart to participate in the solution-finding process. The how type question in a curious, open-ended manner, the negotiator avoids sounding adversarial or confrontational. They're not demanding a different split or rejecting the CEO's proposal outright. Instead, they're inviting the counterpart to collaborate on finding a solution. By maintaining a curious, solution-oriented tone through the use of how type questions, you will keep the door open for productive dialogue with a willingness to work together to find a mutually acceptable outcome, rather than just asserting your own demands versus their demands. This is a list of how questions and what they ask the other person to solve. How do we know? Forces them to prove what they are claiming. How are we supposed to? Forces them to solve a logistic problem. How do I know? Forces them to show you more information. How can we? This is also logistic if it's to move something, or revealing if they have to prove something. How will we know we're on track? And how will we address things if we find we're off track? Are two key questions you can ask to push the other person to think they are defining success their way, winning over the ones who are not at the negotiation table. Negotiation often involves more than just the individuals directly at the table. There are frequently other key stakeholders, influencers, and decision makers who can play a significant role in the outcome, even if they're not physically present during the negotiations. Failing to recognize and account for these unseen players can jeopardize the success of a deal. The key to influencing those who are not at the table is the use of how type questions. Let's explore this concept in more depth through a work example. Expanding into a new market. Imagine you work for a growing technology company that is looking to expand into a new geographic market. Your team has identified a promising opportunity in a neighboring country and has been tasked with negotiating a partnership agreement with a local firm to help facilitate the market entry. After several months of research and preparation, you and your colleagues sit down at the negotiating table with the representatives from the partner company. The initial discussions go well, and you feel like you're making good progress toward a mutually beneficial agreement. However, as the negotiations continue, you start to sense some underlying tension and resistance from your counterparts. Despite your team's efforts to address their concerns, the talks seem to hit a roadblock, and you're unsure of how to move forward. This is where the unseen players come into play. To navigate this complex landscape effectively, it's crucial to understand the perspectives and motivations of the unseen players. The deal makers or deal killers that are not in the room negotiating must be influenced if you truly want to get to yes and get your deal implemented. That can be as easy as asking a few how-type questions like, how does this affect the rest of your team? How on board are the people not on this call? What do your colleagues see as their main challenges? How on board is the rest of your team? How do we make sure that we deliver the right material to the right people? How do we ensure the lower level managers are fully on board? During the next negotiation session with the partner company, the lead negotiator, Sarah, opens the discussion by acknowledging the challenges that have emerged. Sarah: it seems like there are some concerns with the proposal. The partner company's lead negotiator, Maria, pauses for a moment, then responds cautiously. Maria: well, to be honest, our executive team has some reservations about the potential impact on our existing operations and market position. They're worried that this partnership could disrupt our business model and cause undue stress on our employees. Sarah nods thoughtfully. Sarah: that's a valid concern. What do your colleagues see as the main challenges? Maria explains that the partner company's leadership team is concerned about the integration of new systems and processes, the potential for job losses or role changes among their staff, and the risk of losing market to the expanding technology company. Sarah listens carefully, then responds. Sarah: I see. Those are definitely important considerations. How do we make sure that this partnership is successful? Maria then begins to reveal all the points that were discussed in your absence. Asking open-ended questions can be a powerful technique in problem solving and decision making. This approach opens the door for the other person to bring their ideas and objections to the table, offering two key benefits. First, it elevates the status of the other person in the eyes of the group, positioning them as a valued contributor, almost like an ambassador. Second, it allows you to channel the problem solutions through the other person's own voice. This is significant because the suggestions and decisions that emerge will be presented in their words, making them more likely to convince the others. The other person will then advocate for these ideas, as they will be seen as their own decisions, rather than being imposed from the outside. If the group doesn't initially agree, it becomes an internal debate within the group, rather than a clash between your ideas and theirs. This can lead to more constructive problem solving, as the group works together to find a mutually acceptable solution. By using open-ended questions, you can create an environment of shared ownership and investment in the outcome, ultimately leading to more effective problem solving. This is important to remember. You can let the other side feel a sense of victory. Let them think it was their idea. Control your ego. Remember, yes is nothing without how. So keep asking how and get what you want. Next, understand why that's right is better than you're right.